Thanks for coming. This is the title of the presentation. We're talking about planning and investment to 2020, because that's the end of the period of our strategic plan, but of course we think beyond that as well. To begin with an outline, there's always something to report on the external environment, so I'll be talking about that. Planning and budgeting for next year, talking particularly about investment, in brief, but talking particularly about investment in the estate. Planning for 2020, how do we get where we want to go, and the idea of moving beyond one-year plans, because one-year plans are not really sufficient for our purpose, and then talk about some recent successes. So, the external environment, I think first of all, always about government funding. About 60% plus of our funding comes from the Scottish Government. We knew it was going to be tough. It turned out not as bad as we thought. The planning assumption for this past year was a 5% cut, and that's what we've been working on for more than a year, that assumption. The announced higher education budget was a cut of 3.3%, so not so bad. The actual outcome for the higher education sector was a cut of 2.1%, and the outcome for Abertay was a 1% cut. So less bad than we thought. Why did this happen? Well, first of all, some SFC decisions, Scottish Funding Council decisions, benefited us more than some other universities. The example I've given there is teaching funding, where there's a new mechanism, a new formula for teaching funding, which is on the books, hasn't yet been implemented. It's possible that it might never be implemented now because it's been on the books and not implemented for some time. It significantly disadvantages us. It's just a different formula. Some formulas give us an advantage, some don't. The one that's proposed will not. That hasn't been implemented. There's also an element of postponement of pain, and that relates to the difference between the 3.3% cut in the budget and the 2.1% actual cut, which is that some student places for 2016 to 17 are paid for out of the Scottish Funding Council budget for 2017 to 18. We might wonder how that's possible. It wouldn't be possible at the university, it wouldn't be possible probably in our household budgets. How does it work? Well, the government financial year, which the Funding Council works on, runs from April to April. Ours runs from August to July. And so they don't completely overlap. What this does mean is that there's programmed in, all other things being equal, all other things won't be equal, but there's programmed in a cut of 1.something% in next year's budget for higher education, just because that money is being sort of borrowed from next year and put into this year. So it's partly a question of sequencing. So not as bad as we thought, but still it's a cut rather than an increase. We have a new government, still the SNP government in Scotland, it's a minority government, but I think their higher education policies are secure, that they won't have any difficulty getting through what they want to get through in higher education terms. We've all been reading the papers, probably the other areas where they might have trouble. They probably won't, I think, in higher education. The Commission on Widening Access is going to be important. That reported before the election. It's been accepted by the Scottish Government, got broad support from other parties in the Scottish Parliament, and it's been announced that will be implemented. Quite what implementation means is not completely clear, but the objective is to equalise participation in higher education across Scottish society. It's a very ambitious objective, which we would, at least from a moral point of view, I'm sure all identify with. We might also identify some challenges in doing it, but I think we would recognise it as being the right thing. There will be appointment of a Commissioner for Widening Access, something probably along the lines of the Office for Fair Access in England, which has been in place for some years, although is now disappearing, and I'll mention that in a moment. This plays to our strengths. Everything, more or less, in the report of the Commission for Widening Access, I think, chimes with our identity as a university, with our values. Many of the recommendations about an approach to what we call contextual admission, but in other words, admitting students based on their potential and on let's say, a properly nuanced reading of the academic record, taking into account the fact that students from disadvantaged backgrounds have more trouble demonstrating good exam results than other people. Articulation, whereas you'll possibly recall from another presentation I've given, more than a third of our students come from colleges into Abertay. We do all these things because it's part of it, it's in our DNA, because we believe in it. It's possible that other universities will be encouraged or required to do this, and they might universities that don't accept college students in that way because they don't believe in it, they don't think it suits them, or whatever, might be obliged to do it. So that would have a knock-on effect on us. So relates very well to our ethos at Abertay, but there might be some competitive challenges in a way as it works out. Yes, sorry. There will probably, I think, it's our planning assumption, still be continued reductions in funding per student, funding for universities from the Scottish Government. Probably reduced funding per student. There was a reduction in funding per student this year, a small one, but there was one. And it's possible to imagine there might be further cuts per student. There might also be a reduction in places. And one way of doing that, without perhaps making it less likely to get difficult headlines about reducing the number of university places, is to reduce the overlap between what in principle is the same academic level of 6th year at school, HNC at a college, and first year at university. That's been the saving that's never been made, and that people have been talking about for decades. It's never been made. One day it might be made, although it is in tension with the recommendations as a Commission for Widening Access, which emphasises flexibility of routes, to do this, to change your mind, and to try something else. So that's all a bit, I think, a bit opaque, a bit difficult to guess what will happen. But our planning assumption remains that there will be cuts of 5% in 2017 and again in 2018. This is a guess, but it's actually much easier to imagine reasons why higher education funding will be cut by a modest degree than will be increased. We could talk another time about the political background to that, but that's what we're assuming in any case. There's a trend already present before towards stronger Scottish Government direction of the HE sector. In the SNP manifesto, then there's an indication that they want to sign with the HE sector as a whole what they're calling a compact. So they would tell us what they're going to do. We might feel able to insist that they do something, but they would tell us what they want from us as a sector as a whole. This language and this approach mirrors what's happened in the local councils for some time, and it's treating the higher education sector more as a coalition or something rather than the set of individual universities. Not welcome in my view, because it will constrain our autonomy, but it seems if they've announced it, and it's likely they'll at least try to do that. My guess is that they'll succeed. We're having, next one, I was going to say the referendum. We're having another referendum. 2 years ago wasn't enough, we've got another one. But before we get to that slide, there is a higher education bill in England. This relates, by the UK government, relating only to England, but it has knock-on effects in Scotland. There's reformed an integrated oversight of the sector, so the Office for Students is going to combine many agencies, including the Funding Council and the Office for Fair Access. They want to facilitate the creation of new universities, to provide more competition among universities in England. I might have a doubt about whether they're going to be able to do that, because one of the problems has been that policies change so quickly that people who want to invest in a new university might have doubts about whether they'll be successful, but anyway, that's the objective. And the Teaching Excellence Framework, which is going to allow fees in England to increase gradually for universities with good scores, that's partly to attempt at regulation. It's a bit like the regulation of the utilities, where you allow prices to change based on performance. It's also intended to give a high status to teaching by balancing the research excellence framework, and hence the similarity in names. The legislation applies only to England, but there are knock-on effects. The first one is that probably all Scottish universities, which we're already talking about, will probably all participate. We don't have to participate. It's an English measure. It's a measure for English universities. But as far as students abroad are concerned, and probably students within the UK, and probably even Scottish students, although it's a measure applying to higher education in England, are going to look at universities and say, what's your TEF score? Oh, you haven't got a TEF score. And that might even be important for students coming from Scotland, going to a Scottish university. So there's a reputational question, and we might also wish to participate in order to be eligible for higher fees. This is quite a complex area, but Scottish universities are allowed to charge up to £9,000 fees because the UK government is willing to advance the money to the university on behalf of the students through a loan system. If we want to get the progressively higher fees, we'd have to participate in the TEF. Actually, most of our students in other parts of the UK only pay 7,500 or 8,000, but we do charge 9,000 for the accelerated degrees. So none of this is a done deal, but there are knock-on effects for us. The slide that I thought was the next one, which is actually this one, is about the EU referendum. I just want to talk briefly on this. There are specific and general impacts. The specific impact, the main one, is that European Union students will pay fees. This will surely lead to a reduction in their numbers. The number of students who will come here for free education has got to be less than the number of students who will come here they have to pay. We can't even make a comparison with what happens in England, where very many European Union students study and they pay, but they pay on a very generous basis because they borrow the money, as an English student would do, and they pay it back gradually and with a generous rate of interest. And they might never pay it all back. That's very different from having to find £10,000 or £12,000 up front every year to study. So the numbers would go down. Big effect for us would be the reduced diversity of the student body. I don't know how many students will come. Of course some EU students will come if they had to pay, but about 20% of our students from the European Union, adding to our university community, adding to diversity. And they're much larger in number than the foreign students who come from outside the European Union. Not unrelated to the fact that they don't pay, whereas the other ones do pay. You could actually construct an argument that says this is good for the Scottish economy because it does bring in additional money. People will come in and they will pay, whereas before they didn't pay. But the number of students coming to Abertay will be reduced, and the Scottish Government will no longer have a responsibility for paying their fees. And so they won't. And so the income to the university, the main effect would be loss of income from the Scottish Government, and the fee income from the EU students couldn't possibly balance that. That's a certain outcome. Loss of access to EU research funding system, I almost put a question mark after that. There is a precedent there are precedents for countries outside the European Union participating in the European Union research framework. But there's a doubt in my mind whether, if we decide to leave, we would wish to negotiate that kind of thing, which goes along with other kind of free trade agreements, single market agreements, and if we did, whether they would be well enough disposed towards us having walked out of the door to agree it. So there's at least in the short term, there's some doubt about that. There are also general impacts, and we've all thought about this, and we've all read about it, and I've got an incomplete list. Currency, impacts on currency, inward investment, GDP, employment, trade, and all the rest of it. Clearly impact on immigration, where there were, and emigration, the two go together, and hence workforce mobility and availability of skills, and we can all add our own here, impact on the EU of a British departure. If we do try to negotiate having left, who do we negotiate with? What's going on? What's our impact on the EU if we leave? These are a list of consequences of things that would happen, or might happen, or topics, if you like, if we leave. I want to, this is just a balance, to say that none of this should be thought to be an endorsement of one side of the debate or the other. It should be obvious that universities are not members of the European Union can have successful university systems. There are two on the other side of the Atlantic, and one closer to home we can look at Switzerland. But as in any such divorce, geopolitical divorce, there are costs, and it's the smaller unit that pays the cost. In this case, the United Kingdom pays most of it, and there will certainly be a short-term income and impact, and there will be a short-term impact on universities. In the longer run, what matters more is the attitude of the Scottish Government, particularly in the UK Government, to our funding and our regulation, attitudes among society at large to higher education, the performance of schools. All these things matter more probably than whether we're in the EU or not. But in the short run, there'll be bound to be an impact if we were to leave. Whether that's a balanced picture or not, I don't know, but that's my attempt at a discussion of a tricky issue. Planning and budgeting for 2016 to 17, well, the plans are in place. We've got budgets, all the heads of school and service have got budgets. They're pending the agreement of the University Court, which meets next month. We would expect the University Court to approve it. This corresponds to a break-even budget for the university as a whole, as I said, in the face of a small cut in Scottish Government funding. But I want to emphasise also a substantial increase in labour costs. We're paying now higher payroll tax, that is to say, employers' national insurance contribution, higher employers' pension contributions, and we've got a small cut in Scottish Government funding. So it's not that bad, but it is still quite a challenge financially. I'm conscious, of course, that and a small pay rise. I'm conscious that today there's a strike, and that the colleagues who are striking, those who are not, and those who are not striking, have been paying higher contributions themselves to pension schemes. So it's not to say that, you know, so there's a bit of pain around. But it's nevertheless true, there is a big increase, a significant increase in our costs of, in our labour costs. If we look in more bit of detail, this is a kind of simplified presentation of where the money goes. It doesn't add up to our total expenditure. It's got the main headings. We can see schools, that's the present year. Next year, services, we're spending a little bit more on the schools, a tiny bit less on the services. The estate, significantly more, and it's worth mentioning that if we went back into the past, the amount spent on the estate was significantly less than that. So we're investing substantially more in the estate than we did previously. Moving on to the estate, we've got a planned investment of 3.5 million this year, this summer and autumn, in renovating the north wing of the KID building to have new laboratories for general science purposes and specialised laboratories, food processing and food consumer experience, a new facade with much more natural light, and the beginning to new teaching facilities. Our teaching facilities are in general of reasonable quality. Those of you who are teaching will recognise that there's some poor acoustics in one or two places. Places haven't been renovated that much recently. Some of them haven't been renovated very recently, but the audiovisual equipment's very good. In general, they're fit for purpose. But they're rather conventional. This is a good quality but very conventional lecture theatre, and we need to think about how we can innovate in teaching spaces to reflect the innovation already present and in our minds and in our plans for the student experience. And so that's what that's about. I now have a series of pictures. The reality will be more impressive than the pictures. These are architects' three-dimensional renderings of what's going to happen. That's the wall that that's the car park is down here. That's the wall that will now be substantially glazed with the new facade. So much better working conditions. This is one of the labs. It's hard to get an impression of the level of equipment, but you can see they look very much different, much more natural light, and very rich in IT. And the last one is a preliminary outline of one of the learning spaces, where the idea is that students will have, again, very IT rich, facilitating group working, interaction with the instructor, and ways of doing lots of interesting things. Moving on to the more distant future, I suggest I want to talk about how we're going to plan in the longer term. So our plan goes to 2020, we at least need to think about that. There's our plan. The suggestion here is that a series of annual plans is not a sufficient connection between our ambitions, our goals, our grand strategic plan, and what we do in practice. The timescale is too short. Our students, what's a reasonable timescale? Our students are here for 4 years. A project might take 2 or 3 years to complete. So there's a risk with the annual planning process we've done at the moment so far. There's risk of too great a focus on the short term and not enough on the medium term. So we're conducting what we're calling strategic review, which is addressing these questions. What do we need to do to get to 2020 to achieve our goals to the extent that we can? How will each school and service will contribute to that? Going beyond each school and service, what will we do together, need to do together across the university to optimise our performance? None of us, the jargon term is silos, none of us are working in silos. Everything we do affects what happens elsewhere in the university, and everything we do is affected by what other people do. And we need to work out how we can best operate together. And also, because the world doesn't come to an end, hopefully, in 2020, we need to think about the next planning period. We don't imagine discontinuity, we imagine moving smoothly into the next period. So we're going through a process, it's already started. Last month we had a briefing of the senior management group on the process. We had a series of meetings, almost complete, with the heads of school and heads of service to talk about, well, I'll tell you what we're talking about in a moment in more detail, but we're just talking about questions really we might want to discuss together about the future, to help us think about the future. And as well as working with each head, we're going to, sorry, I think leaving on a bit that's the brief meeting with the heads. We're going to have discussion meetings, I'll show you the themes in a moment, with each head and around emerging themes to avoid the silos. So themes are already coming up and we'll pursue them together. And then there will be discussion at some point in the summer. You can see this is becoming slightly more vague as we go on. This is not like an annual planning round where there's a deadline, which is a submission of the budget to the university court, and everything follows from that. This is about us working out how we can stay in shape, get in better shape between now and 2020. And then action, whatever the actions might be, and I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, from the summer onwards. So these are topics for discussion. This is not quite the guidance that's been sent to all the heads, because that's a bit more detail, but it covers all the whole territory. So these are primers for discussion. How can you contribute to all our goals? Questions asked at heads of school of service. These need to be realistic expectations. This is not an exercise in saying that the intended research income by 2020 is whatever it is. We've got a figure for that. How much are you, head A, and you, head B, going to deliver of that? It's about talking realistically about what's possible, what's desirable for each school or service. And different schools and services will contribute differently. It's about what we do, it's also about how we do things differently to improve the experience of students and of staff, and we recognise, among other things, from the staff survey that that's important, as well as that, and to accommodate possible reductions in budget. The university's budget as a whole will almost certainly reduce, because the rate at which we can increase income from other sources, particularly international students, probably isn't going to be big enough to compensate for the short-term reductions in Scottish Government funding. None of this implies that every school or service will have to make a cut, but we've at least got to start thinking about it. Indeed, we have been thinking about it for the last couple of years. What could the university corporately, beyond the service or school concern, do differently to help your unit succeed and to improve the performance of the university overall? So again, we're trying to get out of this picture of just having a dialogue between the people who serve the planning, including me, and the heads of school or service. It's a much broader discussion. Question about partners, internal and external. Again, that reflects the importance of working together, but not just stopping at the edge of the university, but thinking about partnerships beyond the university, questions of staffing, and looking to the future, which is an attempt to get beyond the boundary of 2020. So we think about 2026, that seems like a good year. And just think what your school might look like, what are the challenges, what are the ideas, what are the possibilities in the more distant future. What are the important points? They'll identify themes that will lead to broader discussion. The outcomes, repeating a point I made earlier, the outcomes will guide our development, will include obviously developing our development as a university, focusing on the core business of teaching, research, income generation, and continuing improvements in effectiveness and efficiency. That's to do with doing things differently, as I mentioned earlier on. So those are the kinds of outcomes. I do want to emphasise the following, though. The outcome is a long-term plan. It's not replacing annual planning, and those who are not interested in planning, I apologise for having spent a quarter of an hour already talking about planning, but it doesn't replace the annual plan. There's still a need for annual budget, still a need for an annual plan, but it will provide a framework that will help us think about it and link different years together. It's not a detailed prescription for action. It's a way of thinking about annual plans. So hence the rather slightly vague account of what the outputs are and when it will happen. But it's important for you to know that we're doing it, because in the longer run, this kind of multi-year thinking and thinking about the wide longer-term development of the university will become more significant and more important, and the annual planning process and budgeting will follow naturally from that. And actually in that sense it will be easier to do, because we'll have this more developed framework. I want to talk about some successes. Many of you, all of you will know the chap in the top right. I didn't know whether Connor's here. Is Connor here? He's either not here or he's hiding. Connor has been elected Vice President, it says, their communities of NUS Scotland. This is one of the three most, second rank within NUS. It's just NUS Scotland Vice President, junior only to the President. It's a great achievement. It's not our achievement. And I'm encouraging you to do the same. I'm basking in the reflected glory of the Students' Association and one of our students. But let's do a bit of basking in reflected glory. It's a great success for the Abertay community as a whole. 5 business and management students there with other colleagues have been invited to give advice to BT after taking part, and BT was also involved in the Abertay's Innovation for Global Growth in the business school. This doesn't really describe it. They actually went to head office and told the senior executives of BT how they thought they ought to run the company. I didn't quite like you write out all those words, but it's tremendously, I don't know, something like that. It's tremendously impressive. There are many other successes. I don't want to go on with too many, but that's a tremendous vote of confidence for our students, for whom the credit should go to the students. But I think it's more than reflecting glory. I think we can all take a bit of credit for the great things our students do. Anyway, it's a great success for the Abertay community. The Princeton Review came out. We did well for two years in a row. I wanted to show you the complete list of universities in the Princeton Review. This is the top 25. There's a Princeton Review for all sorts of things. This is the top 25 undergraduate computer games programs. In red is Abertay. There'll be some of the universities you've heard of, even some I've heard of. University of Southern California, big successful private university in Southern California, very good in this area, is number 2. Hampshire College, very successful liberal arts college, big successful state universities, Michigan State, University of Texas somewhere there. MIT, lucky to squeak into number 25, and of course it's a good thing to be above MIT. And that reflects our standing in computer games. There's no law of nature that stops us from being in a table like that, in due course in other subjects. That's part of the point I wanted to make. Top 25 postgraduate games, rather similar. Again, we're sort of in the middle. MIT, again, is struggling to compete with us. My alma mater, one of them, University of Pennsylvania, is alas at number 19, which is a terrible thing. And so again, we're doing really well, and this kind of thing matters. We're not, we tried to do the right thing for the right reason, not to worry too much about league tables, but it's a great thing, and great thing internationally, for the computer games people here and for the university as a whole to be in the top 25. We are the only, we're the only in American terms foreign, the only non-American university in both of these tables, and we're the only university in either of the tables that's not from North America. There are a couple of Canadian institutions in one of the tables. So it's really a pretty good outcome. Finally, the Computer University Guide, which came out a couple of weeks ago. This is a UK University League table. We're up 9 places at 86. It's the biggest increase among Scottish universities. We passed Edinburgh Napier and Queen Margaret University. Not that we're competitive. We went up in every category. And although I know I knew from an early age you weren't supposed to read out what you've written on the slide, I'll read it anyway because we covered everything. Entry grades, student satisfaction, graduate prospects, good honours, which means we're assessing the students properly, student-staff ratio, completion, the success of our students completing their programmes, facilities spent, and academic services spent. And we did it by doing what's right for us, not because we wanted to manipulate university performance to go well in the league table. So we did that for the right reasons. There are more than 100 universities I think about 120 in the Complete University Guide. It would be nice to be higher. But the highest ranked modern university is at 49. It's biased against modern universities. It really is, not just a sense of grievance on my part, but it is because of the way the calculations are done. It would be nice eventually to get up to maybe 70 or so. Wouldn't that be nice? But the point about league tables is you need a score that allows you to do business in this sort of territory. It's not a very good thing to be in the hundreds and hundreds and tens, which we were a couple of years ago. This allows us to do business. I'm sure we'll go up to 60 or 70. And in that case, we'll be among the leading handful of British modern universities. And it might take us 2 or 3 years to do it. And that was, until yesterday when I finalised my slides, that was the last slide. The last slide, the Guardian League table came out on Monday. We were up 8 places at 85. Unfortunately, the bad news is we were only the 3rd biggest increase in Scotland. But hey, there are 18 universities in Scotland, so that's not such a tragedy. We passed, again, different tables, different calculations. Here we passed QMU and Glasgow Caledonian University. The Guardian League table is a primarily subject-based league table, and where the main focus is on the student experience and on teaching. Here's a list of the areas where we went up substantially. I won't read them all out, but not all the subject areas are here. Indeed, some subject areas weren't included for technical reasons. But big increases, it's unfair to single out any of them. But we're getting, in many of these, towards the top of the table, quite different numbers of competitors in different subjects. And in all these cases went up by a lot. So subject-wise and across the university, that's a really, really good outcome. we don't talk too much about league tables. Well, part of it might be that we weren't so high in league tables now, and as a Vice-Chancellor, I'm liable to charge with hypocrisy by talking more about them now that we're going up. But actually, we don't. We do the right thing for the right reason. And this is evidence that by doing the right thing for the right reason, we go up in the league tables, but doing things right. And that's it. So quite a short presentation today, and don't need to spend the whole hour in discussion, but happy to have discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I thought it was a very informative presentation. You can see that there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes which we don't normally get a chance to hear about, and all of that was very good, and obviously it is indeed evidence with improvements across different fields and things. You were mentioning about strategic review and discussion groups with heads of schools and all the rest of it. Is that going to be something that's actually open to all staff to be able to attend, or is that going to really be done at a higher level?
The discussion group with the people with management responsibility. We are not, and perhaps I'll explain why that is, we're not trying to develop new policy from scratch. It's not a consultation with a specific purpose. It's one about getting the perceptions and views of those in the university responsible for leading particular areas. So it's inherently, in my view, a management conversation. When we get beyond that and think about what we might wish to do, I mentioned in several cases the point about doing things differently. When we get beyond that, we will of course consult all those who might have a comment to make on it, and who certainly all those who might be affected by it before we do anything. This is a conversation among leaders and managers about leadership and management in that sense.
Thank you. It was just a suggestion then that perhaps the leaders and management, when they're coming to their own conclusions before they go into these discussions with yourselves, could maybe circulate something for the staff that are involved and actually are on the ground doing the work, could maybe be involved in seeking some of their views. I would expect,
well, we haven't prescribed that because we're not trying to tell people, we expect people to do their jobs, obviously. But this won't be something that's coming simply from the minds of the heads of school or heads of service. They'll talk, depending on what they're talking about, they might talk with different groups of people. And depending on how the discussions go, they might have certain conversations at one time and other conversations at another time. It won't be coming out of a groundswell of opinion, because it's I make no apologies, this discussion, it's a management discussion, but they will work with people as appropriate as when they judge the time to be right. They're not doing it in a kind of an isolated bubble.
Thank you.
It's a question about the teaching excellence framework as having an impact in Scotland, even though to date it's been mentioned as a English-based framework. It's my understanding that one of the criteria for judging teaching excellence will be student destinations.
Yes.
So what impact would that have then on the setup in Scotland if that kind of criteria becomes more of a focus in ranking universities and generating maybe income?
That's probably one of the areas where there isn't a problem. There's a standard survey done across the UK, which is done identically in Scotland and other parts of the UK, called the Destination of Leavers in Higher Education. And that's actually been criticised a bit, and it's possible to be replaced by something else, but it's very likely they'll be across the UK system, because that's the most cost-effective and best way to do it. There are some points where Scotland's slightly different. For example, the quality assurance process in Scotland's a bit different, and there have already been discussions between the Scottish Funding Council. It's not their business really, but they expect Scottish University to participate in it, and I expect us to participate in it, although we haven't taken a formal decision at Abertay. And so the Scottish Funding Council has been talking to the Higher Education Funding Council for England, and I know that the Education Department of the Scottish Government has been having parallel discussions with Whitehall about how to make it work for Scottish universities, should they wish to participate. But of course it's compulsory for English universities, and for universities in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland it's voluntary. But there'll be some universities who won't even think twice about whether to participate in Scotland, particularly ones with large numbers of students from other parts of the UK, from England in particular, and from students from abroad, who will say, so 90% of the universities are in England. If you're coming from the Far East, you will say, well, is this university taking part in the TEF? If not, how can I be confident about the quality? So it's, to my mind, completely obvious that universities like Edinburgh, St Andrews, probably Glasgow, will take part in the TEF. And I think once that happens, I think we'll all do it. And certainly the colleagues, Abertay colleagues who are thinking hard about this, we haven't taken a formal decision, but we're pretty sure we'll do it. Because if we don't, it will be to our disadvantage financially, and it's to our disadvantage financially. One can take a philosophical position. The NUS doesn't like it, for example. One can take a philosophical position about the TEF is a good thing or a bad thing. And many ways in which one could look at it. And I've got a sense of, I'm not convinced, I'm philosophically myself not particularly well disposed towards it, personally. But if it exists, I think we're going to have to do it.
Yeah, just to follow on from that, have we got any idea on how we would look with the TEF, and do you think we'd come out okay with it?
I would expect that, I don't think we've done such a calculation. I don't think the information is available to be able to do it yet. It's a white paper, not a bill, so it's not, the details are not all there yet. But in some of these, as you mentioned, involved in employee destinations, we do moderately well at that, actually. We do quite well at that. We do well, we have a good assessment system which treats the students fairly and so gets a good distribution of degree classes. Our completion rates, that's also a factor. Those are good compared with other universities of our type. So I think we'll do fine. I think that we couldn't afford not to do it probably, because then we'll look odd as a competitor. Well, we are of course competing with universities in England in different ways, and other Scottish universities will do it. So I think we have to do it. I think we'll do fine in it. But many of those are the same as particularly in the Guardian league tables. This might be a more informed answer to some of the questions we've been having from Alistair, or maybe ask another question.
Just to follow up then, I think where we are is TEF 1, we will be eligible for TEF 1 due to our successful earlier outcome. TEF is set to evolve over the next few years, and there's a technical consultation out at the moment. So as Nigel says, at the moment it's unclear as to whether Scottish institutions will opt in, but there's a sense that we'd like to opt in rather than opt out, because at the moment there's a feeling that we're being forced into it. TEF.
We're not being forced into it by the government, of course.
Well, it depends which paper you read, Nigel.
Which government is forcing us into it?
The technical consultation says Scottish universities have agreed to go into the TEF, but they haven't.
So there's a now we're getting University of Scotland sometimes says things on behalf of the university sector which they should not. In any case, they can't speak on our behalf. It's up to us whether to go into it.
Yeah.
The point about the area, this is the enhancement-led institutional review. That's
Yes.
part of the quality assurance system.
Yes.
And TEF 1 is the first stage of it, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, there is an alternative that's being discussed. Sorry, I was at this University of Scotland working group on Monday. And there's an appetite for us to develop in Scotland a system which is equivalent but different to the English system. So whether that's like what you want to call a Scottish TEF or whatever, but there was an appetite certainly from representatives from Edinburgh, who was actually the person advocating this. So it's all a bit messy.
Yes.
I think we will we will be influenced and probably driven by the TEF, whether it's a Scottish TEF.
In one way or another.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key point.
Yeah. Okay.